Case of Sarah Everard. Sarah Everard was born in June 1987 to Jeremy Everard and Susan Everard. Her father worked as a professor of electronics at the University of York, England, United Kingdom, and her mother worked in charity. She was the youngest of 3 children in the family, with older siblings James Everard and Catherine Everard. The family home was located in a quiet cul-de-sac in the Heslington area of the city, and Sarah would often be seen playing in the street with her siblings and other local children. She attended the local comprehensive Fulford School, where she was remembered as an incredibly likable, vibrant, caring, and popular girl who excelled at sports and performed well academically. After completing her A-levels, she left Fulford School in 2005 after securing a place at Durham University, where she studied for a degree in human geography and graduated in 2008. Sarah started her career as an account executive at Proximity London in July 2008, where she worked for 4 months. After that, she joined Rapier as a senior account manager in September 2009. She worked there for 3 years and 6 months before leaving to work at a travel agency. From February 2021, Sarah had been working as a digital account director at McCormick & Morrison, as well as a freelance client lead at Flipside Group, a freelance company. On the evening of March 3, 2021, Sarah was walking home to Brixton Hill from a friend's house near Clapham Common. Unfortunately, something terrible happened. The following day, Sarah's boyfriend, Josh, reported her disappearance to the police. They were supposed to meet, but she didn't show up and didn't respond to any of his calls. Her family and friends were shocked as she was in regular contact with them, and it was completely out of character for her to disappear like that. A large-scale search operation was launched involving hundreds of officers and members of the public. The search concentrated on the area between Clapham and Brixton, including parks, woodlands, and other open spaces where CCTV footage had captured Sarah's presence the previous night. Police stated that she was believed to have walked through Clapham Common after leaving her friend's flat and heading towards her home in Brixton, a journey that should have taken approximately 50 minutes. The police issued a public appeal for information, requesting anyone who had witnessed Sarah or had any relevant information that could assist the investigation to come forward. They released footage captured from the dashcam of a passing police car and a private doorbell-type camera, which showed Sarah walking alone along the A205 Pointers Road towards Tulse Hill, south of Brixton. She spoke to her boyfriend on her phone for around 15 minutes and agreed to meet him the following day. It was uncertain whether she made it home. The police also released a photo of Sarah and a description of her attire when she was last seen. She was wearing a green rain jacket, navy blue trousers with a white diamond pattern, and turquoise and orange sneakers. It was believed that she was also wearing green earphones and a white beanie hat. The investigation was led by the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crime Command, which deployed over 120 officers and staff to work on the case. The search was conducted with the assistance of police dogs, helicopters, and specialist search teams. Specialist officers were brought in from across the force, and the police received more than 120 calls from the public regarding the case. They asked anyone who may have relevant dashcam or other footage to come forward. Sniffer dogs searched gardens and streets around the search site near Everard's presumed route home and in the nearby Oaklands estate. Officers also searched a pond in Clapham Common and drains along the A205. Investigators quickly found CCTV footage showing a police officer from the Forces Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, later identified as Wayne Couzens, with Sarah Everard on 2 occasions. The footage depicted them next to a rented Vauxhall Astra, along with the car's license plate. It was discovered that on the February 28, 2021, Couzens had reserved a white Vauxhall car from a rental company in Dover. On the March 3rd, after finishing a 12-hour shift at the U.S. Embassy in London, he traveled to Kent to pick up the rented vehicle. Subsequently, he drove back to London, where he was seen in Earl's Court and on Battersea Bridge. Upon reaching Clapham, he drove to Earl's Court again before returning to Clapham around the time Sarah Everard went missing. Couzens had parked the Vauxhall on the pavement outside Pointers Court, stopped Everard, and showed her his police warrant card before handcuffing her. Around that time, Couzens and Everard entered the car, and Couzens drove to Kent, where the route of the car was retrospectively tracked using CCTV and ANPR. Cousins and Everard were again spotted in Dover and had transferred to Cousins' personal seat car. Cousins then drove to Hoadswood near Ashford, where his car was captured on CCTV in the area between 3:22 and 6:32, before driving back to Dover to switch back into his rental car before returning it. The Metropolitan Police then arrested Wayne Cousins, along with a woman, at an address in Kent in connection with Everard's disappearance, and they were taken into custody. However, the woman was later released without charge as the detectives continued their investigation. They found that Cousins had told senior colleagues that he was suffering from stress and no longer wanted to carry a gun. Cousins bought and filled a petrol container at a service station in Whitfield and then drove to Hoadswood, where his car was captured on CCTV at 12:37. He reported himself ill from work, handing in his equipment, including his police belt and handcuffs, which raised suspicions of murder. The police searched Hoadswood and found human remains that were confirmed to be Everard's body through dental records. Her remains were found in a large builder's bag, approximately 100 meters from a plot of land that Cousins owned. The police also searched the site of a former body repair garage, previously owned by Cousins' family, at the top of the White Cliffs. The detectives questioned Cousins and learned that when his mobile phone had connected to cell sites in the area of Clapham, he had sexually assaulted Sarah and strangled her to death using his police duty belt. He burned Everard's body inside a refrigerator he had bought. He then bought 2 large builder bags from B&Q before returning to Hoadswood, where he used one of the bags to dispose of Everard's remains in a pond. He drove his personal car to Sandwich, Kent, disposing of Everard's mobile phone, where the police divers searched underwater in one of the town's watercourses. The police also focused their search operation around the rope walk in Sandwich and cordoned off approximately 1 square mile of the town. Sarah's disappearance and the heartbreaking discovery of her remains drew people from all walks of life together in grief and solidarity. The call for change echoed through the streets as individuals raised their voices to demand a safer world for women. Sarah, a vibrant and compassionate soul, was a beloved daughter, sister, and friend. Her disappearance left her loved ones devastated and searching for answers in a world where her safety should have been guaranteed. The investigation concluded that Sarah Everard had died from compression of the neck, according to the results of a postmortem held at William Harvey Hospital in Ashford. Cousins was charged with Everard's kidnapping and murder following authorization from the Crown Prosecution Service. He appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court and was remanded in custody before appearing at the Old Bailey from Belmarsh Prison. Cousins pleaded guilty to kidnap and sexual assault and admitted responsibility for Everard's death on the 30th of September. Cousins was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, with Fulford justifying the severity of the punishment by saying that Cousins' use of his position as a police officer to detain Everard was the vital factor that made the seriousness of this case exceptionally high. Cousins tried to apply for leave to appeal against his sentence, but his appeal against his whole life sentence was rejected by the Court of Appeal as of December 2021. Cousins was imprisoned at HM Prison Frankland in County Durham and was further charged with 4 counts of indecent exposure related to alleged incidents in January and February 2021. He pleaded guilty to 3 incidents of indecent exposure that took place in Kent in 2020 and 2021. Sarah's story has sparked important discussions about women's safety and empowerment, leading to various initiatives and advocacy movements with the shared goal of creating a world where women can walk freely without fear. The global outcry for change following Sarah's tragedy called for accountability, respect, and a shift in societal attitudes towards women's safety. We honor Sarah's memory by working towards a world where every woman can live without fear, where safety is a basic right, and where unity and empathy prevail. Sarah Everard's legacy will be one of strength, unity, and hope, inspiring us all to stand against violence, support women's rights, and strive for a world where everyone can live without fear. Ellie Gould was born on February 6, 2002, in the small British town of Cown. She came from a big, close-knit family. Besides her parents and older brother, she had a lot of relatives living nearby, and they were all very close. From a young age, Ellie had a deep love for animals, especially horses. Her parents would often take her to the stables, and eventually they decided to get her a pony. Ellie got into horseback riding, started participating in various events, and achieved some pretty impressive results. Besides that, she planned to study psychology after high school and join the mounted police. By early 2019, at the age of 17, Ellie was finishing her last year of school. She had plenty of friends there because she always tried to get along with everyone and avoid any conflicts. That same year, a classmate asked Ellie out, and they quickly started dating. Ellie, who had never been in a relationship before, was excited about this new experience. On May 3rd, Ellie woke up early as usual and started getting ready for school. She didn't have any morning classes that day, so she only needed to be at school by noon for just a few lessons. She had arranged for a friend to pick her up, said goodbye to her parents as they left for work, and waited at home. A few hours later, Ellie texted her friend, letting her know she had decided to skip school that day and stay home, telling her not to come by. Her friend figured Ellie just didn't feel like going in for a couple of classes and headed off without her. Around 3 p.m., Ellie's father came home from work. When he walked into the kitchen, he was met with a horrifying sight. His daughter was lying face down on the floor in a large pool of blood. At first, he thought Ellie might have fallen and hit her head or gotten into some other accident. But then he saw the blood splattered all over the kitchen and noticed a knife lodged in his daughter's neck, with her hands gripping the handle. He immediately called an ambulance and tried to perform first aid, following the operator's instructions, but Ellie showed no signs of life, and her father realized she was already gone. When the paramedics arrived, all they could do was confirm Ellie's death, estimating she had been dead for at least 4 hours. They also saw multiple stab wounds on her body, most of them concentrated in her neck area. Ellie's parents were in complete disbelief. Even when the police told them that their daughter had been murdered, her father struggled to accept it. He was in a deep state of shock, convinced that what had happened to Ellie was just some kind of terrible accident. Her body was handed over to the medical examiners, who established more details about what had happened. Along with the 13 stab wounds, they discovered signs of strangulation on her neck. It seemed the attacker had failed to kill her that way, so he grabbed a kitchen knife. They also found several defensive wounds, showing that Ellie had fought back, desperately trying to defend herself from the attacker. While forensic experts examined the crime scene, the police began their investigation. They brought Ellie's parents to the station and asked if they knew anyone who might have wanted to harm their daughter. After looking at each other, both parents could only think of one name: Thomas, Ellie's boyfriend. Her mom explained that Ellie and Thomas had started dating just a few months earlier, and at first, Ellie was thrilled. She had never been in a relationship before, and Thomas seemed like a great guy. He was a top student, played sports, and was part of the school's rugby team. But things between them started to go downhill pretty quickly. Thomas wanted to spend almost all of his time with her, and he became more demanding about it as the days went by. Ellie, on the other hand, couldn't give him that much attention. She needed to focus on her final exams and take care of her ponies. As time went on, Thomas's behavior only got worse. He would get upset with her, accusing her of not wanting to spend time together, and became increasingly controlling. He would call and text her constantly throughout the day, and then get angry when she couldn't respond right away. Ellie's parents had always felt that Thomas wasn't the right match for her. When he visited their home, he would mostly stay quiet, which they found odd. Ellie, on the other hand, was very outgoing, and her parents figured the relationship wouldn't last long. And they were right. Just a few months into the relationship, Ellie started thinking about breaking up with him. Not only was Thomas's behavior making her more and more uncomfortable, but she also realized that she needed to focus on her exams and getting into college. In the end, she decided to end things and broke up with him on May 2nd, just one day before she was killed. The police also spoke with Ellie's friends, who shared more details about the breakup. Ellie had told them that Thomas didn't take it well. He kept trying to convince her to stay together, calling her constantly and asking to meet, but Ellie refused to talk about it. Their mutual friends mentioned that Thomas's behavior changed drastically after the breakup. That same day, he posted on social media saying that the past few days had been incredibly hard for him. Not only had he just broken up with Ellie, but his father had been diagnosed with cancer and his aunt had recently passed away. Thomas ended the post by saying he was struggling to cope and planned to seek help from the school counselor. After seeing the post, some of Thomas's friends reached out to offer their support. When they spoke with him, they noticed he seemed genuinely depressed. But when the police asked if they thought Thomas could have harmed Ellie, his friends couldn't believe it and insisted that it was impossible. With all this information in hand, the investigators decided to talk to Thomas. But before that, they examined Ellie's phone and discovered that Thomas had messaged her that morning, asking to meet. They went to Thomas's house and asked where he had been that morning. Thomas explained that his mom had driven him to school, but he was too upset over the breakup and his other problems to attend classes. So instead of going in, he waited until his mom left, walked to the bus stop, and headed back home. On the way, he messaged one of his teachers to let them know he wouldn't be at school today. According to Thomas, he didn't leave the house after that. He spent the rest of the day doing homework and relaxing. During the conversation, he also asked if Ellie was okay, and the officers told him about her death. After speaking with Thomas, the investigators went to talk to his mother, and here they encountered an interesting twist. She confirmed that she had dropped him off at school that morning, but when she returned home later, Thomas wasn't there. The police returned to talk to him again. He explained that he hadn't wanted his mom to know he skipped the entire day of school, so he hid in the closet and waited until she left for work. During the conversation, the officers noticed fresh scratches on Thomas's face. When asked how he got them, Thomas claimed he did it himself, but the investigators were skeptical. Given that the medical examiners concluded Ellie had fought back during the attack, these injuries could have easily been inflicted during the struggle. The police also questioned all of Ellie's neighbors, and one of them shared an interesting observation. That morning, they had seen a man approaching Ellie's house. However, due to the distance, the neighbor couldn't make out the man's face or any other useful features. They could only provide a rough description of what he was wearing. The police decided to check Thomas's alibi by looking at the GPS data from his phone. They confirmed that he returned home after leaving school, but what they discovered next sharply contradicted his story. At 10:50 a.m., Thomas's phone disconnected from his home Wi-Fi and began moving in the direction of Ellie's house. Just 3 minutes later, his phone was located near her home, where it remained for about an hour. At 11:51 a.m., the phone started heading back towards Thomas's house and reconnected to his home Wi-Fi within minutes. The police realized that it would have been impossible for Thomas to cover the distance between his and Ellie's home on foot in just 3 minutes, since he lived in a neighboring village several miles away. Then they reviewed surveillance footage along the route and spotted a silver Ford Focus, which belonged to Thomas's parents. The movement of the car matched the phone's location data, leading investigators to conclude that Thomas must have been driving it. The camera also captured the same car leaving Thomas's house again and returning just 18 minutes later. The investigators couldn't find any footage that showed exactly where Thomas had gone during that short trip. However, they managed to narrow down the general area where he might have stopped. Since it seemed like Thomas had only been there for about a minute, the police suspected he might have been getting rid of evidence. Their hunch soon proved correct. While searching a small wooded area, officers found a trash bag containing blood-stained rags and an apron. With all this evidence, the police obtained a warrant to search Thomas's home. They asked him to provide the clothes he had been wearing that morning, and Thomas said he had put them in the washing machine. The officers seized the clothing, along with his shoes, and sent everything to the lab. Forensic experts quickly conducted the analysis and found traces of blood on nearly all of his clothes. Although Thomas had tried to wash them, the experts were able to extract a DNA sample from the blood. The analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Ellie, just like the blood found on the rags in the woods. Thomas's clothes also matched the description given by Ellie's neighbor, who had seen a man near her house that morning. All of this, combined with other evidence, painted a pretty clear picture of what had likely happened that day. According to the investigators' version, Thomas had planned the murder from the start. After his mom dropped him off at school, he immediately took a bus back home, hid in the closet, and waited for her to leave. He then drove the family car to Ellie's house. It seems that Ellie let him in, possibly thinking he just wanted to talk, and they ended up in the kitchen. Based on the medical examiner's report, Thomas tried to strangle Ellie, which is when he got the scratches on his face. When he couldn't kill her that way, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her 13 times. For the next hour, Thomas tried to clean up the crime scene, using the rags and leaving smudges all over the kitchen. He then gathered the rags into a trash bag and tried washing his sneakers in the sink, where traces of blood were also found. After that, he wiped the knife with a kitchen apron, likely to erase his fingerprints, and tossed the apron into the bag. Then he placed the knife in Ellie's hand and positioned it around her neck, seemingly hoping the police would think she had done it herself and wouldn't suspect him. Detectives also recalled the message Ellie had sent to her friend, saying she wasn't going to school and asking not to pick her up. They concluded this message was sent after she had already died. It seems Thomas had taken her iPhone, unlocked it using Ellie's fingerprint, and sent the message himself. Apparently, he didn't want the body to be found so soon. But that wasn't the end of Thomas's attempts to cover his tracks. After throwing his clothes in the washing machine at home and dumping the bag of evidence in the woods, he ran into a neighbor and asked for a ride to school. There, he attended the remaining classes, chatted with his friends, and even stopped by the school nurse. He told her how difficult the last few days had been for him and how he was struggling to cope. The nurse, concerned about his emotional state, called his mother, who then took him home. Later that day, Thomas posted on social media about his breakup with Ellie and the other problems he'd been dealing with. At the time, Ellie's body hadn't been discovered yet, and police believed that all of these actions were part of his attempt to create an alibi. It took the police only a few hours to gather all this evidence, and by the same evening, the 17-year-old was arrested on suspicion of murder. During the interrogation, Thomas continued to deny any involvement, and the case was eventually sent to court. The first hearing took place on August 29th, for months after the murder. This time, Thomas suddenly changed his story. He stood before the judge and confessed to killing Ellie, though there was a catch. According to his new version, he had gone to Ellie's house that morning to study for their exams. During their study session, an argument broke out, and from that point on, he claimed he could hardly remember anything. He recalled trying to strangle her, but said the rest of his actions were a complete blur. The prosecution didn't buy Thomas's new story, pointing out several major inconsistencies. First of all, Ellie didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, and all her friends and family knew this. So, the idea that they were studying together seemed highly unlikely, especially since her friend was supposed to pick her up soon. Thomas's claim of memory loss also didn't add up with the fact that he spent an hour trying to clean up the crime scene. On top of that, he placed the murder weapon in Ellie's hand as if trying to make it look like she did it herself. After that, he went on to get rid of the evidence, create an alibi at school, and even tried to wash all of his clothes. Given all of this, the court sided with the prosecution, and in November 2019, Thomas was found guilty of murder. Before the sentencing, he gave a final statement, apologizing to Ellie's family and expressing genuine regret for his actions. However, there was another issue at the end of the trial. Thomas was only 17 at the time of the murder, which directly impacted his sentence. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole in just 12 years. He also added an additional 5 years for the brutality of the crime. This means Thomas could potentially be released at 34 years old. This verdict sparked outrage not only from the victim's family but also among many citizens across the country. People were baffled as to how someone who committed premeditated murder could receive such a short sentence. But despite the public outcry, there was nothing anyone could do to change the court's decision. Ellie's father stated that this sentence puts other women at risk, as Thomas could become a danger to society upon release. He believes that Thomas is a psychopath who should not be let out of prison for the rest of his life. This injustice prompted Ellie's parents to dedicate the next few years to changing the existing legislation. In 2021, they finally achieved progress. The authorities passed Ellie's Law, which allows juvenile murderers to receive prison sentences of up to 27 years without parole. Unfortunately, this change will not affect Thomas, as he was convicted under the old laws. The only thing Ellie's parents managed to secure was a requirement for Thomas to undergo extensive therapy after his release, in hopes that it would prevent him from committing similar crimes in the future. Since then, Ellie's parents have been organizing events in memory of their daughter, inviting children to ride her horses. According to her mother, this activity helps ease the pain of their loss, as horseback riding was Ellie's greatest passion. The case of Shibli Sadi. Bangladesh's 18-year-old Sadiq was a very good boy, honest and hardworking, but his honesty cost him his life. Sadiq's full name was Shibli Sadi, and he was only 18 years old. He was born in Chattogram City, Bangladesh, which is one of the world's oldest seaports with active natural harbors for centuries. Sadiq belonged to a very poor family, where his father Shafiq was a truck driver and his mother, Naida Kha, was a housewife. Sadiq was their only child. Since childhood, Sadiq had a great passion for studying and had big dreams for his life. To fulfill his dreams, he started working at a poultry farm at a very young age. The money his father earned was barely enough to cover their household expenses. So Sadiq started working at a nearby poultry farm to pay for his college fees. Sadiq quickly became skilled in his work, and the owner of the poultry farm promoted him directly from a regular worker to a manager. Even after receiving this position, Sadiq showed no signs of arrogance and continued to work diligently. During his time at the poultry farm, Sadiq had managed to save some money for his college fees and had also made several friends there, who were all older than him by 5 to 6 years. But they all respected Sadiq and worked under him because he was educated and took his work as a manager seriously. He also ensured that others worked honestly while on duty. However, sometimes due to Sadiq's honesty, there would be conflicts with his own friends at the farm. Although these conflicts were not major and were usually resolved within the farm premises. Besides his work and studies, Sadiq had no other distractions. If he ever had any urgent work, he managed it well and always made it home on time before it got too dark. On the morning of August 28, 2023, Sadiq went to work and performed his usual duties, just like any other day. However, that evening, he did not return home on time, as expected. At first, his parents assumed that he had been given some important task at the poultry farm where he worked. But as time went by, their concern grew. Between 11:30 and 12 at night, his parents tried calling him 2 or 3 times, but Sadiq did not answer any of their calls, which was highly unusual for him. Although Sadiq didn't answer his parents' calls, they were still thinking positively as the night passed. However, Sadiq still hadn't returned home the next morning. Sadiq's parents tried calling their son once again, but he didn't answer this time either. They also tried calling the owner of the poultry farm, but his phone was also unreachable. Sadiq's parents searched around their home and also asked people near the poultry farm about their son, but no one knew anything about Sadiq. Since they couldn't find any information about Sadiq from anywhere, they started to worry a lot. Amidst this worry, on the morning of the 29th, they received a call from Sadiq's number. Seeing this, Sadiq's parents felt a little relieved. However, as soon as they answered the call, they sensed that their son sounded quite panicked. Sadiq then told his mother that he had been kidnapped and had been inside a car for the last 12 hours. He said his captors were beating him and that he was hiding and talking to his mother in their presence. But the call suddenly got disconnected before Sadiq could speak further to his mother. Now after this, Sadiq's parents knew that their son had been kidnapped and he was in quite a bit of trouble. The kidnapper himself cut Sadiq's phone, and Sadiq was the sole heir of his family, which is why his parents were very worried about him. It was because of this attention that Sadiq's mother, Naida Kha, started calling her son again, but now someone was disconnecting the call from the other end. After this, she was about to go to the police to file a complaint when she received another call from the same number. But this time it wasn't Sadiq, but a stranger speaking. The person on the other end said that they had Sadiq in their custody, and that if the family wanted his safety, they should arrange 1.5 million taka quickly. The location to deliver the money would be given on the next call. Sadiq's family was very poor. They didn't even have 1 lakh taka. But because it was a matter of their only son's life, they started gathering money. For the next 3 days, they put all their efforts into collecting money. They asked for money from their relatives and neighbors, but from the 28th to the 31st, they couldn't even gather 2 lakh taka, let alone 1.5 million taka. On August 31st, 2023, the kidnappers contacted Sadiq's parents again and demanded money. This time, Sadiq's parents told the kidnappers directly that they could not gather that much money. After hearing Sadiq's parents' response, the kidnappers compromised and said they would release Sadiq if the parents brought them 200,000 taka quickly. It was unusual for kidnappers to act this way, but it seemed as if they were already aware of Sadiq's family's financial situation. The kidnappers had already reduced the ransom amount to 200,000 taka. But even then, Sadiq's parents told the kidnappers that 200,000 taka is also too much for their family. In response, the kidnapper said, "Okay, but if you don't give us the full amount, then we will kill Sadiq." After hearing this, Sadiq's parents said, "Don't harm our son. We need a 4-day extension to gather 200,000 taka." Now, Sadiq's parents also borrowed money from shopkeepers to gather the remaining amount. Some people understood their compulsion and gave them money, but some couldn't. However, after wandering everywhere, they managed to gather 200,000 Bangladeshi taka within 3 days. And now they were just waiting for the kidnappers' call. On September 4th in the afternoon, the kidnappers called and summoned Sadiq's father to the Bandarband district headquarters with the money. Additionally, they threatened again that if he disclosed anything to the police, Sadiq would not be alive. Now, since Sadiq's parents wanted to save their son, they did not take any risks and went directly to the location specified by the kidnappers, paying them the ransom. There, Sadiq's father waited for a while. Then 2 masked kidnappers arrived. They didn't talk much to Sadiq's father and just took the money from him. However, as the kidnappers were leaving, they assured Sadiq's father that his son would reach home before him. Hearing this, Sadiq's father was immensely relieved and hurried home. But upon reaching, he found that Sadiq hadn't arrived yet. He asked his wife about their son's whereabouts, and upon hearing this, Naida became anxious. Subsequently, Sadiq's father shared everything with his wife. After hearing the entire story, Sadiq's mother became even more anxious, yet both of them waited outside their home's door until evening, hoping for Sadiq's return. By now the night had fallen, and they hadn't received any further information about Sadiq. Similarly, this night passed, and by then, Sadiq's parents had lost all hope, and their condition had deteriorated to tears. Up until now, even Sadiq's relatives had learned about his disappearance, and one of those relatives advised Shafiq to lodge a complaint with the police. Initially, Sadiq's father was also afraid, because the kidnappers had warned him that if he tried to tell the police anything, they would harm Sadiq. But then, on September 7th, Sadiq's father called his son's phone, although the kidnappers had forbidden it, but there was no response. From August 28th to September 7th, Sadiq had been missing for more than 10 days, and things were getting quite difficult. So on the evening of September 7th, Sadiq's parents decided to go to the local police station. There, they recounted everything that had happened over the past 10 days to the police. Initially, upon hearing all this, the police were quite angry with Sadiq's parents for not informing them of the incident first. But when Sadiq's parents mentioned the threat given by the kidnappers, the police understood what a parent must be going through at such a tough time. After that, the police quickly assembled a team to search for Sadiq and began their search. During the investigation, the police first checked Sadiq's background, such as his behavior in college, his friends, and how he lived with his family. It was revealed that Sadiq was a good boy who neither had enmity with anyone, nor did he engage in fights with anyone. However, during the police investigation, Sadiq's mother, Naida Ka, remembered something. Before moving forward, she told the police about a fight Sadiq had with his friends inside the poultry farm. Upon hearing this, the police immediately went to the poultry farm and apprehended 6 workers who were working there. Each of them was interrogated one by one. In the initial investigation, these people tried to prove themselves innocent. But in the end, when the police pressured them, 4 out of the 6 boys confessed to their crime. The names of these 4 boys were Umang Ching Mama, Suing Mama, Anumara, and Yukai Mara. The police arrested these 4 on charges of kidnapping. During the investigation, the police asked all of them about Sadiq's location, but none of them uttered a single word. However, after being kept in jail and tortured for quite some time, they opened their mouths and also revealed their other two accomplices. On September 11th, they began to recount how, on the night of August 28th, when Sadiq was returning home, they kidnapped him to take revenge. Their plan was to kidnap Sadiq, beat him, and then demand money from his parents in exchange for releasing him. Initially, everything was going according to plan, and these people were going to get the money. However, during this time, Sadiq saw the faces of two of them, which made them think that Sadiq now knew everything. Therefore, they thought that if they let Sadiq go, he would inform the police and they would be caught. So after that, they used a knife to attack Sadiq and attacked him repeatedly from his face to his feet with that knife. As a result, Sadiq bled a lot and died on the spot. Now, the police and Sadiq's family had learned that Sadiq was no longer alive. The police are investigating this case as a murder case. After that, the police asked these people about Sadiq's body, to which his killers replied that after killing Sadiq, they had cut his body into pieces and thrown it on a hill. The police went with these people to that hill and found some body parts there. But among those pieces, the police found a proper body a little far away, but its face was completely disfigured. The face of that body was so badly disfigured that the police couldn't identify whether it was Sadiq or someone else. However, after looking at the clothes on that body, its height and some other factors, the police believed that it was Sadiq's body. Sadiq's family confirmed that yes, this was indeed their son. Now the police had arrested all of them on murder charges. And during custody, Umang Ching Mara made several revelations in the Sadiq murder case. He stated that he had a good friendship with Sadiq, but 2 months ago they had a disagreement over some issues. After that, Umang Ching decided to take revenge on Sadiq. Additionally, he mentioned in his statement that he himself had killed Sadiq with his own hands and even ate small pieces of his body. Afterward, this was a horrifying and shameful act. But as soon as this news appeared in the media, protests started across the country. During this time, people couldn't tolerate their anger. And when the police were taking all these accused on the evening of September 11th, the crowd snatched Umang Ching from the police and beat him so severely that he died on the spot before the court could sentence him. People themselves gave him the punishment for his deeds. Moreover, the police managed to remove all the other accused with great difficulty and put them behind bars. Since then, there have been no updates on this case. If any new update comes in this case, I will inform you through a community post on my channel. However, Sadiq's parents lost a son who loved them dearly and was very serious about his future. So with this, the Shibli Sadi Hridoy murder case comes to a close. Melissa Wolfenbar was born on September 9, 1977 in the small American town of Locust Grove. She was the youngest child in her family, and her older sister, who was 7 years old when Melissa was born, helped their mom take care of her from day one. As they grew up, the sisters formed a really close bond. In high school, Melissa met a guy named Christopher, and soon after graduating, they got married. The couple settled in a quiet suburb of Atlanta, where Christopher landed a job at a glass manufacturing plant. Not long after moving, Melissa got pregnant and they welcomed a daughter, followed by a son a little later. By 1998, 21-year-old Melissa was spending most of her time at home taking care of the kids. Even though she was quite young, she was happy with her growing family. Melissa also tried to visit her parents and sister as often as she could, but with the distance and all her responsibilities, those visits were rare. They planned to spend Christmas with her family that year, and a month before, on Thanksgiving, Melissa called her mom to ask for a special gift. She wanted some old photo of her grandfather. Her mother went through all the family albums, found the perfect photo, and began waiting for her daughter and the grandkids to arrive. But when Christmas came, Melissa didn't show up. At first, her parents were a bit surprised since they'd planned this for over a month, but they figured she might just be too busy. After all, she had 2 small kids to care for, and she'd also recently started working at a cafe because Christopher's income wasn't enough to support the whole family. The situation was complicated by the fact that they couldn't just call Melissa and ask why she didn't come. There was no phone in her house, and back then, cell phones weren't common. Melissa usually called them from her in-laws, but since her last call on Thanksgiving, she hadn't reached out once. Her parents decided to wait. When Melissa didn't call on her mother's birthday, they started to worry something might be wrong. That's when they decided to head to Atlanta to check on her. However, they were met with a surprising discovery. Melissa and Christopher's house was completely empty. After speaking with the neighbors, they learned that the family had moved out right after Christmas, but no one knew where they had gone. This only made her parents more confused. They couldn't imagine that Melissa just moved somewhere else without telling them. Eventually, they got in touch with Christopher's parents and through them finally reached Christopher himself. But the whole situation became even more puzzling. He claimed Melissa had left him back in December and he hadn't seen her since. According to him, she had decided to move to California and start a new life, leaving him and their kids behind. Her parents found Christopher's story hard to believe. First off, they couldn't imagine Melissa abandoning her kids, who were only 1 and 2 years old. Plus, if she had really decided to move, they were sure she would have reached out or visited at some point, but that never happened. Despite their doubts, Christopher stuck to his story, and Melissa's parents couldn't get any more information out of him. They returned home unsure of what to do next, but determined to find their daughter. Over the next few months, they tried to track her down, reaching out to friends and relatives. But it was as if Melissa had vanished into thin air. In the spring of 1999, Melissa's mother saw a news report about Atlanta police finding a human head in a bag, soaked in bleach, in a wooded area. A few days later, they discovered 4 more bags containing other body parts. What immediately caught her attention was that the site was near Christopher's old job, and she feared the remains could belong to her daughter. However, the police later said that the head belonged to a missing man from another cold case. By early 2000, her parents finally decided to involve the police, but it didn't help much. Investigators spoke with Christopher and concluded that Melissa had likely left her family to start a new life, which is why she hadn't reached out. As a result, the police didn't pursue the case, but Melissa's parents refused to believe that she had just walked away from her old life. In fact, with each passing month, they became more convinced that something bad had happened to her, and they suspected Christopher was involved. Her parents knew the couple had been having serious problems. Christopher had physically abused Melissa several times, leading her to leave him and stay with her parents, bringing the kids along. But every time he'd apologize and talk her into coming back. This fact only made Christopher's story more suspicious. If he had done everything he could to get her back in the past, why hadn't he done anything this time? He didn't call her parents, didn't go to the police, and made no effort to stop her from leaving. Another odd detail was that, according to Christopher, Melissa hadn't taken anything with her. No clothes, no jewelry, not even her documents. It all seemed incredibly strange, but without help from the police, Melissa's parents felt powerless to do anything about it. For the next few years, but there was still no sign of Melissa. But in 2003, everything changed, and in the most shocking way. Police were investigating the murder of a woman from back in 1977. The case had been cold for 26 years, but it was recently reopened. After reviewing the evidence and running a DNA test, detectives identified the killer. It was Carl Patton, Melissa's father. But that was just the beginning. Once police arrested him, Carl offered them a deal. He agreed to confess to 3 more murders in exchange for full immunity for his wife, who had helped him with the killings. As part of the deal, Melissa's mother also agreed to testify against her husband, and eventually she was granted immunity. According to their confessions, in December 1977, a woman named Mary, who was close to Carl, offered him $15,000 to kill her husband. The reason? Her husband had been cheating on her. Plus, Mary had taken out a life insurance on him and wanted to cash in. Carl agreed and brought in a friend to help carry out the murder. However, when they approached the man, his lover was with him, so they decided to kill her too. They dumped the woman's body in a river and left the man's body in his car on train tracks, hoping to make it look like an accident. A month later, Carl told his wife that his partner had apparently blabbed about the crime to his girlfriend, and now he wanted to take care of them too. Carl invited the couple to his home, killed them, and with his wife's help disposed of the bodies by throwing them into a river. She also helped him clean the crime scene and the van they had used to transport the bodies. Later, Karl confessed to a fifth murder that took place 5 years before the others. It was again Mary who had offered him money, this time to kill her first husband, and Karl agreed. As a result, Karl was charged with 5 murders, and the police immediately suspected him in Melissa's disappearance. But Karl insisted he would never harm his daughter and had nothing to do with it. Upon further investigation, detectives concluded that Karl was probably telling the truth. Initially, they had only suspected him of 1 murder, but he voluntarily confessed to 4 more. Karl claimed he deeply regretted his actions, and it was this remorse that drove him to confess. But that wasn't all. Seizing the moment, Karl decided to ask for a favor. He requested a meeting with the lead detective who had tied him to the murder and said, "You managed to catch me, so maybe you can find my daughter." The detective was intrigued by the whole situation. Here was a man who had committed 5 murders, now asking him to investigate his daughter's disappearance. It was an unusual situation, to put it lightly, and the detective agreed to look into it. He began reviewing the limited information about Melissa's disappearance and quickly noticed one specific detail: those bags of human remains found near Christopher's workplace 4 years earlier. At the time, police had assumed the remains belonged to a man, but the detective discovered that this assumption wasn't based on forensic evidence, just a guess. Given the fact that the remains were found in an advanced state of decomposition, he decided to have them re-examined and ordered a DNA test, as he already had Karl's DNA on file. The results confirmed his suspicion. The remains didn't belong to a man. They belonged to Melissa. After this breakthrough, police finally established that Melissa had been dead for several years, not missing, and her case was officially reclassified as a homicide. According to the medical examiner's report, the victim's body had been dismembered using a reciprocating electric saw. Melissa's torso was never found, which was quite odd. The police conducted multiple searches in the wooded area where the other remains were found, but still couldn't locate it. Despite this, investigators uncovered one interesting lead. They began looking deeper into Christopher and interviewed his former employer at the glass factory where he had worked until Melissa's disappearance. It turned out that Christopher had been fired around the same time for allegedly stealing an electric saw of the same type used to dismember Melissa's body. Melissa's mother also revealed to the police that Christopher had a history of physically abusing her daughter. On top of that, he had a criminal record. Another suspicious detail was that Christopher had changed his name almost immediately after Melissa's death, with no clear reason for doing so. All of this made Christopher the prime suspect in her murder, but the police had no hard evidence against him. They interviewed him multiple times, but he stuck to his original story. Although he frequently changed certain details, during one conversation, Christopher claimed Melissa had a lover and ran away with him. Later, he stated that she wanted to sell fake IDs, which explained why she hadn't contacted anyone. The police also uncovered another interesting fact. Shortly after moving from their house, Christopher left his children to live with his parents and hardly ever played a role in their lives since then. He visited them sometimes, but the children didn't even understand that he was their father. But unfortunately, none of this brought the investigators closer to an arrest because they needed some solid evidence. They obtained a warrant to search the house where Melissa had lived at the time of her death. Given that the killer had used an electric saw, detectives believe the murder likely took place in that house, and they hoped to find blood traces or other evidence. Forensic experts meticulously examined every inch of the house, taking samples from the floor and other surfaces. Unfortunately, their analysis yielded no results. The forensic technology of the time was far less advanced than it is today, leaving the detectives with no choice but to store the collected materials in the evidence warehouse, hoping that one day they might prove useful. The detectives made several more attempts to find new leads and get Christopher to talk, but each effort came up empty. The case eventually went cold again for many years. Meanwhile, Melissa's father was convicted and sentenced to 5 life terms plus 20 years in prison. It's worth noting that Mary, the woman who had paid him for 2 of the murders, had passed away in the late 80s, so she never faced any punishment for her role. Melissa's mother and her older sister continued trying to push the investigation forward on their own. They worked to keep the case in the media spotlight and stayed in regular contact with the detectives, but their efforts didn't yield any progress. This continued until 2017, and Melissa's mother never gave up hope of finding justice for her daughter. That year, she decided to attend an event where true crime enthusiasts gathered to discuss cold cases and search for new leads. One of the attendees was a crime analyst named Cheryl McCullum, and Melissa's mother decided to ask her for help. She shared the story of her daughter's disappearance and added something that immediately caught Cheryl off guard. The woman said, "My husband committed 5 murders and I helped him." Cheryl became intrigued by the case, and after the event she began to dig into it thoroughly. She spoke with Melissa's family and even kept in contact with her father, who was serving time in prison. What struck Cheryl the most was how a man who had committed 5 murders seemed more concerned that his daughter's murder would never be solved. Over the next few years, Cheryl collected all the available information on the case and came to the conclusion that the most obvious suspect was Melissa's husband, Christopher. Although there was no direct evidence against him, the overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence left little doubt. He had a history of domestic violence against Melissa, made no effort to find her after she disappeared, and simply moved on with his life as if nothing had happened. But the most incriminating detail was the fact that shortly before Melissa's death, Christopher had been accused by his employer of stealing the exact type of saw used to dismember her body. No one in Melissa's family doubted Christopher's guilt, including her children. By the time Cheryl became interested in the case, they had grown up and also tried to help resolve it. Cheryl also consulted some prominent figures in the true crime community, including journalist Nancy Grace and several law enforcement officials. After reviewing all the materials she had gathered, they all agreed Christopher was the most likely suspect. Despite this, there wasn't a single undeniable piece of evidence against him, and the case remained at a standstill. At that point, Nancy Grace suggested that Cheryl start her own podcast to draw more attention to the case. Publicity can often become a crucial factor in unsolved cases. It might attract new witnesses who might not realize the significance of the information they hold, potentially changing the course of the investigation. Eventually, Cheryl decided to launch the podcast, and in 2023, she released the first episode about Melissa's case. Since then, she has recorded numerous episodes featuring the victim's mother and other relatives. Cheryl presented all the information she had gathered over the years, yet there was still no progress in the case. This continued until April 2024, when the long-awaited breakthrough in the case finally happened. After she published another episode, a witness reached out to Cheryl, stating that he had stumbled upon the podcast and might have valuable information. This individual shared that just before Melissa's disappearance, he witnessed a serious argument between her and Christopher. The details of his account remain unknown, as it all took place only a few months prior. Detectives chose not to disclose this information for the sake of the investigation. According to some sources, it seems that during this argument, Christopher allegedly threatened Melissa and Cheryl passed his story on to the police. This became a turning point, prompting investigators to reopen the case. Over the next 3 months, police reviewed the case materials, interviewed everyone involved, and examined the evidence using modern technology. Experts analyzed the bags containing the remains, along with various samples from Christopher and Melissa's home, where the murder apparently took place. In August 2024, investigators held a press conference to announce that, 25 years after Melissa's death, her husband had finally been arrested. As with the witness testimony, police did not disclose specific details about the evidence they discovered during the renewed investigation. Some sources suggest that modern analysis tools may have uncovered DNA traces or other substantial evidence confirming Christopher's involvement in the murder. The reason detectives are withholding details is fairly standard. The more information is available before the trial, the greater the chances that the defense can use it to their advantage and find ways to challenge the evidence. Currently, Christopher is in jail awaiting trial, and a preliminary hearing where he will plead either guilty or not guilty has yet to take place. Melissa's relatives have little doubt that he will evade justice, and neither do the investigators. It seems they have indeed uncovered serious evidence that will be extremely difficult to dispute. At this moment, the case is drawing closer to its conclusion, though it has taken nearly 26 years. Melissa's story has spread across the country as its details are truly astonishing. Police were able to confirm that the victim was no longer alive only because her father had been arrested for 5 murders and asked investigators for help. Then the podcast played a crucial role in attracting the witness whose testimony led to the reopening of the investigation and ultimately Christopher's arrest. As for Melissa's children, they also believe in their father's guilt and hope that justice will prevail soon. Besides waiting for a guilty verdict, they want to learn the full truth and Christopher's motives, but that will only be possible if he confesses. The story of Karina Vrono is both horrifying and baffling. Firstly, nothing seemed to miss on the day of the fateful event. The attack occurred in broad daylight in a fairly populated area. Secondly, her death has critical aspects to it. Thirdly, the investigation and sentencing of the perpetrator raised many questions. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, Karina arranged to meet her father after work to spend time together. Since Miss Vrono had moved away, family gatherings had become rare because everyone was busy with their own matters. In addition to her commitments, she was balancing 2 jobs. Philip picked up his daughter and took her home. There, the family shared their impressions of the past week. When Karina was about to leave, she asked if her father wanted to go jogging with her, as they often did, covering several miles together. Her father replied that he couldn't this time, due to severe back pain that nothing seemed to alleviate. Perhaps he needed a new prescription, or maybe it was just the change in weather. Mr. Vrono offered to call a cab for Karina due to his discomfort and inability to join her run. However, the weather was beautiful, the heat had abated, and there was a fresh scent in the air, hence Karina declined his offer. She was training for the upcoming marathon. The young woman had recently broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to distract herself. A jog would clearly do her good. That evening was the last time her parents saw their youngest daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left the house for a jog. Her first stop was Spring Creek Park, a cozy and tranquil place buried in greenery, a true paradise amongst the city's infrastructure. However, only part of the park was available for walking. The rest was covered with thickets and swamps. Mr. Vrono asked his daughter to stick to her usual route and stay away from unfamiliar paths and people. Unfortunately, Karina ignored his advice in search of solitude. She decided to go to a grassy, deserted place. Karina's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. She felt a sharp pain in the back of her head and fell down. This rash decision cost the young woman her life. A frightening uncertainty entered the Vrono home. It had been 2 hours since they had said goodbye to their youngest daughter. She should have been home by now, or at least answering the calls of her parents, who were frantically trying to reach her, and she had promised to keep her cell phone with herself. The anxiety was growing. Her father sensed that something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, the chief of the New York City Police Department. They were on good terms, and the high-ranking official knew that Philip would not make a fuss over nothing. After that, Karina Vrono was reported missing. Police began searching for the young woman, combing the park area and surrounding streets. As a result, experienced canine units were brought in, since it is known the first 24 hours after the sorcery, the disappearance of a person, are crucial. Law enforcement utilized all available resources before nightfall. At the same time, Mr. Vrono, along with a group of volunteers, searched for his daughter on his own. He scoured the park from end to end, combing paths and wading through tall grass, all while making phone calls. As dusk fell, he noticed a light in the grass. As he approached, he recognized Karina's phone. Maybe she lost it and just didn't let them know? Philip approached, headed toward police officers, deciding to continue picking his way through the thicket, stepping into the grass. As he ventured further, Philip stumbled upon something soft, a partially undressed female body lying face down. When he turned it over, a familiar face stared back at him. A desperate scream escaped from his father's chest. It was Karina. She hadn't simply lost her phone as he had initially believed. His little girl didn't answer her phone because life had been cruelly taken from her. The crushing realization of what had transpired overwhelmed Mr. Vetrano. The police, hearing the screaming and yelling, quickly rushed to him. They dragged Philip away from his daughter's body, explaining that it was now a crime scene. They emphasized that anything in the vicinity could be considered evidence, and implored him not to touch anything to prevent tampering. On the journey home, Mr. Vetrano was lost in thought, tormented by how to break the news of their daughter's death to his wife. Images of past memories flooded his mind. He recalled vividly how on July 12, 1986, in Queens, their second daughter was born. From an early age, Philip had been proud of Karina. She was obedient and well-mannered. He remembered taking her to school for the first time and how excellently she performed academically. Her strong educational foundation enabled her to earn advanced degrees. Karina graduated from St. John's University with a master's in speech pathology. She always dreamed of aiding children and worked tirelessly with autistic kids. Karina loved traveling and writing and had a passion for sports, especially running, an interest she shared with Philip, which brought them closer together. He recalled how closely he scrutinized her suitors out of paternal jealousy, eager for her to find true love and eventually establish a strong family like his own with Kathy. He hoped for wonderful grandchildren. The return journey felt endless. As they approached the house, Mr. Vetrano paused at the entrance and took a deep breath. Fortunately, he didn't need to explain anything to her. She understood everything from her husband's face. Kathy cried, approached her husband, and hugged him. Soon, Karina's relatives and friends learned of the incident. They struggled to recover from the shock. Believing in the sudden death of the young woman was hard, let alone its violent nature. Ms. Vetrano had been subjected to a brutal attack. This was the conclusion reached by investigators. At first glance, it was obvious that the woman had resisted. Even in death, her fists remained clenched. Bruises and abrasions were found on her once young and healthy body, and her athletic clothing was torn. The autopsy showed that the back of the victim's skull had been damaged by a blunt object, probably a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A clear mark was visible on the woman's neck. The forensic examination also revealed the intimate nature of the crime violence. The experts' findings confirmed the police's initial suspicions. Earth and grass were found under the victim's fingernails, probably in an attempt to free herself from her attacker's grip and escape. Specialists examined her mouth and found teeth knocked out and cracked in places. She had clearly bitten to defend herself. Even the woman's neck was covered with numerous scratches. She was grabbing with her hands, trying to force her attacker to let go of her. Shortly after this tragedy, new information leaked to the media from Princeton, Massachusetts. Another jogger's body was found among tall grass. The woman had apparently also been out for a walk in a secluded place and suffered a similar fate. At first glance, these cases seemed identical, raising questions about another potential serial offender. In the United States, geneticists took charge of the case, tasked with comparing DNA samples collected from the crime scenes. Fortunately, unidentified samples were found on both victims. Contrary to police expectations, the analysis showed no connection between the crimes. It turned out that the DNA samples belonged to different individuals. It's well known that most lethal crimes are committed by someone close to the victim. Thus, police couldn't ignore any possibility. To this end, the victim's father provided his DNA since he was first to discover his daughter's body. Later on, all of her relatives also underwent a DNA test which yielded no matches. Detectives then decided to interview Karina's family and friends to find out if she had any enemies or ill wishes. Turned out there were none. She was respected and loved by everyone. Investigators developed a new theory. Someone acted on base motives upon meeting Karina in a secluded place and attacked her. Feeling stuck, they sought public help by offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to the perpetrator. The initiative received widespread response. Detectives explored some 250 leads, conducted 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 1,700 reports, all to no avail. It seemed like the perpetrator hadn't committed crimes before, or at least hadn't been caught for them, complicating things further. On August 31st, 2016, a utility worker approached the police station with significant information at the time of Ms. Vitrano's death. He found himself in a restricted area of the park one day. Suddenly, a man emerged from the bushes and took off running in a northerly direction. Because of his testimony, the New York Police Department created and distributed a sketch of the suspect in December 2016. However, they considered that the person shown in the sketch might have just been a passerby caught at the wrong place and time. Unfortunately, releasing this sketch didn't provide any new leads, and the investigation fell into another long stalemate. On December 4th, 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined in to help solve Karina Vitrano's case. At first, they developed a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, this individual was very familiar with the area, especially the park where everything occurred, suggesting he might live or continue to live nearby. Fearing capture now, he seems to avoid that area. It was evident he knew that the quiet and partially overgrown territory was perfect for hiding his actions. Based on this idea, police conducted screenings among local African American men. However, this didn't bring about any breakthroughs. Let's take a look about Chanel Lewis. Chanel Lewis' life didn't stand out much from other young African American individuals. He lived in one of Brooklyn's low-income housing complexes, approximately 4 or 5 miles from Spring Creek Park, was unemployed and living with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. One detail setting him apart was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Yet this did not stop him from graduating from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. Former classmates remembered Chanel as a quiet loner, who constantly faced bullying. One shared that even girls intimidated and punched him. He had no friends. Another peer noted that while Lewis sometimes fought back, he wasn't effective at it and often got ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel always wore a hoodie and would smirk and walk away when things got tough, earning him the unfortunate nickname African Lizard. 17-year-old Danielle Houchins, a fellow student, described Chanel as a bright student with good grades. "He liked to show me funny videos on the bus," she recalled. "I never saw him being cruel." Some sources reported that the young man once claimed he wanted to harm all the girls during his time in middle school, even posing the question, "What happens if I bring a knife to school?" Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of the school to which Chanel was transferred, commented on this. "We received no reports of threats in middle school. During his time at our school, he had no disciplinary sanctions. I never heard him make threatening statements towards other students." Nonetheless, Chanel was a troubled teenager who often experienced bullying. He dreamed of working in social services, aspiring to help those in distress. When conflicts arose at home, he would wander the streets frequently and visit the park. Lewis had several minor encounters with the police, 2 for violations in Spring Creek and 1 for urinating in public in May 2016. Another incident happened when a local merchant reported Lewis for loitering in his store with a crowbar. Responding officers checked Chanel's ID and released him as he had no prior incidents. However, this information was retained by the police and later played a crucial role in the investigation into Karina Vitrano's death. In February 2017, Detective John Russo, who was involved in the investigation, remembered something significant. He had repeatedly seen a young man in a hoodie wandering around the park. Russo even attempted to follow him once, intrigued by his behavior. The young man walked slowly and stopped for long periods in front of houses near the park, as if scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Russo lost sight of him when he contacted his colleagues by phone. Following a store owner's report of suspicious activity, a teenager matching Chanel's description came to the police's attention 2 months into the investigation. Detective Russo recalled this wanderer, thinking he might have seen or heard something relevant. Investigators then focused on Chanel Lewis. After Detective Russo took a closer look at his file, Chanel's peculiarities had raised their interest. The police began inquiries about him, questioning acquaintances and teachers. It emerged that he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news stirred significant concern and suspicion. With no other leads, officers decided to focus on Lewis. It was discovered that during Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, his clothes torn, and he had visible bruises and abrasions. When his mother inquired about what had happened, Lewis claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Lewis's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, mostly cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. However, they noted similarities between events involving Chanel Lewis and Karina Vrono. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DNA for analysis. Detectives wondered if a perpetrator would willingly do this. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5th. Lewis admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, listening to music, not through thickets. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, nodded and quietly said yes. When I met a woman alone, he began again. I decided to follow her. When she passed by me, I grabbed her shoulders and threw her to the ground, then hit her face about 5 times so she couldn't scream. He recalled how his punches knocked out several of her teeth, injuring his own hand in the process, echoing details eerily consistent with earlier evidence they had gathered. He also mentioned that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes. Miss Atrano fiercely resisted by biting. To avoid drawing attention, Lewis dragged her off the path into Tall, where he tried to undress and assault her. She was horrified, but kept resisting. Chanel then strangled her until he realized she was no longer alive. When asked if he knew the victim beforehand, he replied, "I did not know her before this. It all happened by chance." The motive for the act was unexpected and bizarre. Loud music played by a neighborhood gang member for hours had triggered Chanel's hatred and uncontrollable aggression. These negative emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman. A strange reason indeed. Investigators, confusion faded when DNA comparison results matched perfectly. Microscopic traces found on the victim's body and phone belonged to Chanel. Consequently, the police and prosecutor concluded the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed unlikely. It's possible Chanel had noticed Karina before, since he often went to that park. He might have seen her with her father, liked her, and decided to approach her. After being rejected, he became furious and attacked her, causing the situation to spiral out of control. This scenario would have been more understandable. On November 5, 2018, the trial against Chanel Lewis began. Despite his previous statements to authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty, a stance echoed by his family denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, facing him with a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis's guilt not only unfolded in the courtroom, but also spilled over into the media. Lewis's defense team stirred things up by pointing out alleged legal violations during his arrest. Along with several news outlets, they claimed racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these allegations as baseless, emphasizing that the investigation complied with legal standards. The prosecution presented tangible evidence and DNA analysis findings, while the defense argued that this evidence was insufficient and contaminated due to many people at the crime scene, including Karina's father, who discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Rossano stated that odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also introduced Lewis's phone records, revealing his internet searches on second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, which raised questions about what sin Chanel hoped to atone for. The release of Lewis's confession video sparked further controversy. His lawyers argued he was under immense pressure, leading to a coerced confession. They suspected police might have fabricated evidence. The recording commenced only after Lewis was pressured, raising concerns that the search of his home violated protocols. The defense suggested that the investigation into Karina Vrono's death was initially mishandled. With public pressure mounting for an arrest, they argued Lewis became a scapegoat. The jury was deeply influenced by the defense's compelling arguments. After considering both sides, jurors could not reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial. A retrial was initially scheduled for January 22, 2019, but later postponed to March 2019. Following 5 hours of deliberation during the retrial, Chanel Lewis was ultimately found guilty of Karina Vrono's death and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. The defense employed delay tactics by citing an anonymous source to allege misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and conspiracy. A case that seemed straightforward at first sparked widespread prejudices and fears in society. Karina Vrono's tragic death affected many, serving as a stark reminder for women to remain vigilant about their safety. Danielle Houchins was born on November 11, 1980 in Alexandria, Minnesota. Shortly after, her parents had 2 more kids, a boy and a girl. Once their youngest was born, the family decided to move to a small town called Belgrade, Montana. The quiet place was surrounded by mountains and located far from big cities, but it was a popular destination for tourists. A lot of people came there to ski or hike in the mountains, enjoying the picturesque nature. Danielle's parents chose the town mostly because they were offered jobs on the ski patrol. This was perfect for both of them since they loved spending as much time outdoors as possible. Their passion spread to their kids from a very young age, and the family was always up for an adventure. They went skiing, hiking, fishing, and took boat trips on the nearby rivers. Danielle herself got really into climbing, which was easy to get into around there. At the same time, Danielle managed to excel at school. She quickly became one of the top students and had big plans for her future. She dreamed of going to medical school and becoming a bioengineer. On September 21, 1996, their town was hosting its annual festival. People would gather on the streets, listen to music, watch some performances, and just enjoy the day together. Danielle, who was 15 at the time, had plans to meet up with her friends in the evening. But before that, she had a few free hours to kill. Instead of just sitting at home, she decided to go for a walk along the trail located near the river just outside of town. Her mom asked her to be back by 2 p.m. and gave Danielle her wristwatch since she didn't have one of her own. Danielle grabbed a bottle of water and headed out around 11:30, promising to be back on time. But 2 o'clock came and went and she still hadn't returned. Her mom started to worry, especially since they were expecting guests soon. Thinking Danielle must have just lost track of time, she decided to head to the trail to bring her home. She took a friend with her and they drove to the parking lot where the trail started. The first thing they noticed was Danielle's white pickup truck. Even though she was only 15 and technically not allowed to drive without an adult, her parents would sometimes let her use the car. It was a small, quiet town with little traffic, and Danielle was already a pretty good driver. Her mom noticed the truck's doors were unlocked, but Danielle was nowhere to be seen. She and her friends started walking along the trail toward the river, but they didn't get far before they spotted Danielle's car keys and her bottle lying on the ground. Her mom became even more worried and started calling out for her, searching the path from the parking lot to the river. When there was still no sign of Danielle, she wasted no time and went straight to the authorities for help. At that point, her mom thought Danielle might have fallen off a slope or gotten injured in some accident. Since the woman didn't have a cell phone, she drove to the police station, and about an hour later, search teams arrived at the trail. The searchers combed through the trail and the surrounding woods, checking the riverbank as well, but they couldn't find any trace of Danielle. As night fell and temperatures dropped close to freezing, the rescuers decided to call off the search until morning. However, Danielle's family refused to go home. They continued searching for her, joined by family friends and local residents who broke into groups and spread out to cover more ground. In one of those search groups was a man and his 2 sons, who were friends with Danielle's sister. They headed into the wooded area near the riverbank, using flashlights to guide their way. A few hundred yards from the parking lot, they noticed something strange in the water and went closer to check it out. Shining their lights into the river, they realized it was Danielle's body, lying near the shore in just a few feet of water. The man immediately knew she was dead and ran back to his car to notify the police. On his way to the station, however, he spotted Danielle's father and broke the devastating news to him. The police examined the scene and handed Danielle's body over to medical experts, who needed a few days to conduct a proper examination and determine the cause of death. But despite this, the sheriff quickly announced that it appeared to be an accident. There were no visible wounds or signs of foul play, so the police initially believed Danielle may have just accidentally fallen into the river and drowned. Danielle's family, devastated by the news of her death, couldn't believe it. From a young age, she had spent a lot of time outdoors, was very familiar with nature, and knew that trail along the river well. Her parents also couldn't understand how she could have drowned in such shallow water. Still, the sheriff stuck to his version and didn't launch a proper investigation. But everything changed when the medical examiners released their report. They discovered that Danielle had numerous scratches and bruises, which looked like defensive wounds. It appeared she had fought back against someone. They also noted that her underwear had been pulled down. The experts found it hard to imagine how this could have happened in the course of an accident. Moreover, they established that Danielle had been sexually assaulted and found a biological sample from an unknown male on her underwear. As for the cause of death, the examiners agreed that she had been drowned, but it seemed that someone had held her underwater. They also noticed that Danielle's watch, which should have been on her wrist, was found up near her elbow. The experts suggested that the killer might have dragged her by the arms, causing the watch to slip down as he pulled her toward the river. Despite all these findings, the medical examiners for some reason still listed the manner of death as undetermined. While they were sure Danielle had drowned, they couldn't find enough solid evidence to conclusively prove it was an intentional murder. Because of this, the police didn't launch a full investigation, maintaining that they were still uncertain about what really happened to Danielle. Even so, they did try to gather more details. When forensic experts examined Danielle's clothes, they found 4 hairs on her underwear, which also belonged to an unknown male. They believed these were arm hairs and managed to extract a partial DNA sample. However, the FBI didn't yet have a national DNA database. The only thing the experts could confirm was that the hairs and the semen found on Danielle's underwear came from the same person. The police also re-examined the area where Danielle's body was found and discovered a man's boot print in the dirt, although they weren't able to determine if it was connected to the case. Investigators questioned several potential suspects they thought might be involved, but couldn't link any of them to the crime. The problem was that the DNA sample they had was only partial, so they couldn't even compare it to the suspect's DNA. It's worth mentioning that many details of this case were kept secret, not only from the public but also from Danielle's own family. For a long time, they didn't even know that she had been sexually assaulted. From their perspective, it seemed like the police genuinely didn't have any idea what happened to Danielle and were still trying to figure it out. Despite the sheriff's position, some police officers were puzzled that the case hadn't been reclassified as a homicide and investigated accordingly. One of them was Cindy Botek, who had joined the police just a few days before Danielle's death. She's been involved in the investigation and, from the very beginning, was convinced they were dealing with a murder. However, back then she didn't have the authority to go against her superiors and launch a full-scale investigation. So all she could do was wonder what had really happened that day. One of the theories was that the killer might have known Danielle, like a neighbor or a friend. Votek spoke with her parents, but they couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm their daughter. She had never had any problems with her classmates or anyone else in town. For months after Danielle's death, there was almost no progress in the case. The police continued to interview people and consider various suspects. But because of the sheriff's reluctance to start a proper investigation, they couldn't do much. Some officers, including Botek, were baffled that the case hadn't been reclassified as a homicide and that no one was actively searching for the killer. To them, it was obvious that Danielle had been attacked and the person responsible could still be living in their community. A few years after the murder, the police tried entering the partial DNA sample found on Danielle's body into the FBI database, but no matches were found. In the years following Danielle's death, her family learned more details about the case, including the fact that she had been sexually assaulted. They were outraged that the sheriff hadn't treated it as a homicide from the start and had kept such critical information from them. The sheriff later claimed he had never considered the case an accident and had always believed it was a murder. This contradicted his earlier statements to local newspapers, where he had clearly said there wasn't enough evidence to label it a homicide. Danielle's parents also remembered him telling them the same thing, which only fueled their frustration and confusion. The sheriff then tried to shift the focus onto the medical examiners, insisting that the only reason he didn't launch a full investigation was because they had listed the manner of death as undetermined. But Danielle's family believed the sheriff was just trying to avoid responsibility. Everyone understood that a proper investigation in the first few days after the murder could have helped solve the case and catch the killer, but little effort was made. Now, many years later, finding the murderer had become far more difficult with the trail gone cold. Danielle's parents continued to fight for a fair investigation, but each attempt led to a dead end. Eventually, her younger sister took up the case, giving interviews to local media, reaching out to investigators, and doing everything in her power to ensure that one day Danielle's killer would be found. In 2019, 23 years after the murder, Danielle's family finally managed to get the investigation reopened. Unfortunately, this didn't lead to any real breakthroughs. The FBI's DNA database still didn't show any matches, and re-examining old suspects went nowhere, leaving the case stalled once again. This continued until 2021, when a new sheriff took over the local police department. He had joined the force just days before Danielle's death, and her case had haunted him ever since. Like some of his colleagues, he had always believed it was a murder, and now he had the authority to launch a full investigation. But after so many years, he had almost no solid leads, except for the partial DNA sample from the possible perpetrator. The sheriff realized the case needed a fresh perspective, so he brought in two outside experts. One was a former investigator from California who now worked as a private detective, and the other was a DNA specialist. Together, they focused on identifying the owner of the hair and the biological material found on Danielle's underwear. First, they sent the samples to a lab in California, which had some of the most advanced DNA analysis tools, and then they waited. Around the same time, in August 2023, Danielle's case was officially reclassified as a homicide, nearly 27 years after her death. A few months later, in early 2024, experts from the lab contacted the investigators, saying they hadn't gotten closer to identifying the owner of the DNA. Although they had managed to do something important, their tools allowed them to extract a full DNA profile, which was still a significant step forward. The investigators then sent these samples to another lab in Virginia, hoping they could use genetic genealogy to trace the DNA back to its owner. Several months passed before they finally got the call they were waiting for. The experts at the Virginia lab explained that they had uploaded the perpetrator's DNA profile to public genetic databases, where people voluntarily share their DNA to find relatives. These databases have helped solve many cases using genetic genealogy, tracing suspects through their family trees. But this time, things took an unexpected turn. To the experts' surprise, they immediately got a perfect match. It turned out that the owner of the DNA had willingly submitted his sample to the database, something that doesn't happen often. The man was 55-year-old Paul Hutchinson, who lived in a small town called Dillon about 100 miles from where Danielle was killed. Investigators discovered that, at the time of the murder, Hutchinson was 27 and a student at the University of Montana just 12 miles from Belgrade. He had a degree in biology and worked for Montana's Bureau of Land Management. Paul was also married with 2 children. What stood out even more was that he had no criminal record, not even the slightest offense. Now that the police had identified their suspect, they needed to obtain a direct DNA sample from him. On July 23rd, they went to his workplace to talk to him. As they pulled up to the Bureau building, they saw Paul standing outside with his co-workers. The investigators told him they wanted to ask him a few questions at the station, and according to them, they could see the color drain from his face. Still, Paul agreed to go in for questioning. The detectives took their time, starting by asking about other unsolved cases in the area. Paul remained fairly calm at first, but everything changed when they showed him a photo of Danielle. He suddenly became extremely nervous, sweating, scratching his face, and even chewing on his hands. He could barely stand up and even stumbled over a chair when trying to get up. To the police, His reaction was almost a confirmation of guilt. However, Paul continued to deny any involvement in the murder, but his confession wasn't necessary. Detectives collected his DNA sample and sent it to the lab. For now, they let him go, since they didn't have enough evidence to charge him with the murder until the lab results came back. Right after the interrogation, the detectives contacted Danielle's sister and told her that they had finally found her sister's killer. They added that the police had no doubt about his guilt and that the DNA analysis would only confirm it. Danielle's sister, who had been waiting nearly 28 years for this moment, felt relieved knowing the person responsible would finally face justice. She was also aware that they still had to go through a long court process to bring this case to a close. But things took an unexpected turn. The day after the interrogation, when the police were supposed to receive the DNA results from the lab, Paul called his local police station, saying he needed help. He gave the operator his location and then hung up. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Paul's car parked on the side of the road. Inside, they found him dead with a gun lying beside him. During the investigation, detectives concluded that Paul did it himself. There was no note in the car, but his motive seemed clear. He likely realized there was no way to avoid prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. For his wife and children, the entire situation was a complete shock. None of them knew what Paul had done nearly 30 years ago, and they weren't even aware that he had been questioned by the police. His family learned about these accusations at the same time they found out about his death. Paul's friends and co-workers were just as stunned when the truth came out. They all saw him as a devoted family man and a reliable friend. Despite the shock to those who knew him, detectives had no doubt that Paul was responsible for Danielle's murder. In August 2024, they held a press conference where they announced that his DNA was a perfect match with the samples found on the victim's underwear. Police believe this was a crime of opportunity. There was no evidence that Danielle knew Paul. It's likely she crossed paths with him near the trail, and he made the decision to assault her, killing her afterward to ensure she wouldn't identify him. Danielle's family admitted that hearing about Paul's death brought them more relief than frustration, even though he would not face a lifetime in prison. What angered them most was the thought that he could have been caught decades earlier if the local sheriff had taken the case more seriously. If that had happened, Paul wouldn't have been able to live nearly 30 years of freedom, start a family, and enjoy a peaceful life. Paul's wife also expressed her condolences to Danielle's family, stating that she in no way supported or excused what he had done. On February 5, 2010, at York Crown Court, Harold Landry's trial began under heavy scrutiny. Harold was accused of taking the life of his wife, Lucy Davis. The final hearing, marking a climactic end to this grim saga, took place in early February 2011 at Wolverhampton Court. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge David Fett, known for his uncompromising nature, presided over the proceedings. Harold Landry, a 64-year-old man, the center of this legal battle. The prosecutor, Rachel Brand, presented the evidence against Harold, painting a chilling picture of the events leading up to Lucy's tragic death. Brand's cold and precise delivery of facts left little room for doubt about Harold's guilt. Harold Landry had been convicted of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy Davis. Harold, who was supposed to be Lucy's protector, now stood condemned as her murderer. Pete, Harold's friend and lawyer, unable to bear the burden of defending him, passed the case to Andy Childs, an experienced attorney. Childs faced a daunting task to convince the court that Harold had not intended to kill Lucy, but was driven to uncontrollable aggression. Throughout the trial, Harold was a figure of misery and regret. He wept openly, professing his love for Lucy and expressing deep remorse. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter, hoping to mitigate his sentence. The defense argued that Harold's actions were a result of an irresistible outburst of aggression, provoked by circumstances beyond his control. However, this argument faced fierce opposition. The prosecution presented the court with shocking photographs of Lucy's injuries. The sheer brutality depicted in these images spoke volumes, overshadowing Harold's claims of unintentional harm. Each piece of evidence painted a grimmer picture of Harold's actions on that fateful day. When the final verdict was announced, Harold Landry was sentenced to life in prison. The decision brought a sense of closure to the legal process, but left an indelible mark on all those involved. This tragic case stands as a somber reminder of the fine line between love and violence. It underscores the unpredictable nature of human relationships and the devastating consequences when that line is crossed. Lucy Davis's death serves as a poignant example of how quickly love can turn into a nightmare, leaving a trail of heartache and loss in its wake. Domestic violence can lead to fatal consequences, as it did in 1971 among the picturesque Welsh landscapes. Born in the small town of Pontypridd, Lucy Davis was a charming girl whose childhood was filled with unconditional love and warmth. Roger and Andrea, Lucy's parents, created an atmosphere of happiness and comfort in their home. Together with her younger sister Anna, Lucy grew up in the beautiful village of Glencoe. Lucy took her first steps among majestic mountains and enchanting forests. Her charming smile and kind heart set her apart from other children. She easily won the sympathy of her teachers and peers. Seeing his daughter's passion, her father gave her and her sister the opportunity to immerse themselves in the magical world of horseback riding. Under the strict guidance of experienced instructors, they learned the basics of this noble art, conquering peaks and overcoming obstacles. Lucy and Anna became professional horse riders. Spending her childhood in Wales was a real paradise for Lucy Davis. She blossomed like a beautiful flower there, absorbing the beauty of nature and the love of her family and loved ones. The hobby of horse riding not only gave Lucy and Anna loyal companions, but also served as real school of life. Horses taught them discipline, self-control, and responsibility. The sisters' talent and perseverance were recognized at prestigious competitions, where they won multiple awards. However, Lucy's world wasn't limited to the riding arena. Her excellent mind and hunger for knowledge motivated her to make new discoveries. Music became another passion of young Lucy. She enthusiastically took flute and piano lessons. Honing her skills, her efforts were not in vain. A year later, she played both instruments perfectly, charming audiences with her talent. Lucy was delighted to join the Glamorgan Youth Orchestra, where her musical journey continued to flourish. Lucy Davis dedicated herself to refining her musical talents, finding an outlet for her love of music and creativity within the school choir. Music wasn't just a pastime for her. It was a profound means of expression. Growing up, Lucy's days were a blend of carefree play and diligent work, instilling in her a strong foundation of dedication and hunger for knowledge, qualities that would shape her future achievements and endear her to those around her. In high school, Lucy crossed paths with Garrett Jenkinson, a fellow Welshman shrouded in mystery. Despite the enigma surrounding Garrett's past, the two formed a close friendship that only deepened over time. Though Garrett harbored romantic feelings for Lucy, he chose to keep them buried deep within himself. Upon graduating in 1998, Lucy was resolute in her pursuit of a musical career and higher education. She secured admission to the University of Yorkshire in Northern England, initially envisioning herself as a future music educator. However, as her ambitions evolved, Lucy found herself drawn to the bustling artistic landscape of a metropolitan city. This newfound aspiration led her to Grimy McAllister, whose worldview and sense of humor resonated deeply with Lucy. Their relationship flourished, prompting Lucy to introduce Grimy to her parents. The initial encounter proved successful, solidifying the bond between Lucy and Grimy and setting the stage for their future together. Roger and Andre recognized him as the ideal life partner for their daughter almost instantly. After careful consideration, Lucy and Grimy made the decision to move in together, forging their own family. Sometime after the move, Lucy proposed the idea of official cohabitation, which Grimy agreed to in 1995. Even while still pursuing their studies in college, they welcomed a son into their lives, whom they named James. Lucy opted to take a break from her own pursuits to focus on caring for her son, while Grimy diligently continued his studies to provide for their family, taking up night shifts at the city's postal sorting department. Lucy into a whirlwind of challenges, but she faced them with optimism and determination. Despite her deep love for her family, the months spent at home with her child were tinged with loneliness. Rarely did she and her husband find time to be together, and his night shifts only exacerbated the situation. Seeking solace and connection, Lucy created a social media account under the pseudonym Miseria, immersing herself in a virtual community where she could share her experiences and forge new friendships. It was within this online realm that her attention was captured by a user named Harold Landry, a 53-year-old entrepreneur hailing from Louisiana. Rising from humble beginnings, Harold's fervent pursuit of independence and success from a young age propelled him to establish a thriving company manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. His hard work not only brought him material wealth, but also garnered him prestige and eventually billionaire status. Conversing with Harold proved to be a revelation for Lucy. His life experiences, unwavering dedication, and boundless generosity left her captivated. However, their relationship faced its share of challenges. The disparity in their ages, social standings, and lifestyles created friction between them. Harold's life seemed extravagant and diverse, filled with eccentric hobbies and lavish acquisitions, including real estate holdings on KML. In Mexico, Harold's marital status was shrouded in mystery. He had been married twice and divorced twice, yet nothing was known about any children from these unions. However, in 1992, Harold's life took a dramatic turn when he divorced his second wife and crossed paths with Geraldine Price. Geraldine, born in 1966 and originally from Mexico, was 20 years his junior and married to Chris Price with 2 children. Despite her familial ties, Harold managed to capture the heart of this young woman. On February 6, 1994, Harold orchestrated a romantic dinner for Geraldine in New Orleans. They hired a babysitter, Christian Hutton, to tend to their children, allowing them to enjoy an evening devoid of parental responsibilities. As the night drew to a close, Harold escorted his girlfriend home. In a gesture of gratitude, he offered Christian a ride home, to which she accepted. Unbeknownst to Harold, fate had a surprise in store. Chris Price, Geraldine's husband, had been surveilling the couple. Upon witnessing their clandestine affair, Chris resolved not to let the matter slide. He pursued Harold, and when they halted at a red light, unleashed a torrent of accusations. Despite Harold's composed demeanor, the situation escalated. In a fit of rage, Chris dared Harold to shoot him. Without hesitation, Harold brandished his firearm, warning Chris of the consequences. Ignoring the warning, Chris goaded Harold further. In a swift and decisive action, Harold fired, striking Chris in the neck. Miraculously, prompt medical interventions spared Chris's life. In 1997, Harold stood trial in St. Mary Parish Courts, charged with the attempted murder of Chris Price. His attorney, Pete Fannin, argued that Harold had been entrapped. Although the jury found Harold guilty of aggravated assault with a weapon, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, following an appeal, Harold was released on parole, having paid a fine and completed community service. Harold found himself forever indebted to Pete for his legal representation and unwavering advocacy, which ultimately secured his freedom. As their friendship blossomed, Harold and Chris reached a settlement agreement, though the exact compensation remained undisclosed. Settling in Covington as a wealthy man, Harold openly shared his past with Lucy, including failed marriages and a troubling incident. Rather than repelling Lucy, Harold's revelations only seemed to deepen her attraction towards him. His gift of persuasion captivated her, and after parting ways with Grimmy, Lucy and Harold decided to embark on a romantic relationship. Eager to shield their love from unnecessary complications, Harold endeavored to avoid any potential troubles. In the early 2000s, he journeyed to England to meet Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre, who, despite initial surprise at the age difference, supported their daughter's choice wholeheartedly, refraining from interference in their relationship. Expressing his devotion through lavish gifts, including expensive jewelry, Harold spared no expense in fulfilling Lucy's desires. His love for her grew so intense that thoughts of marriage lingered constantly in his mind, yet he insisted on perfection before taking the plunge. Seeking to fortify their bond, Harold extended an invitation to Lucy, her son Jameson, and her ex-husband Grimmy for an unforgettable trip to Mexico. To Harold, Mexico wasn't merely a vacation spot. It represented paradise, amplified by the proximity of Pete's apartment, lending an air of comfort to their excursion. Inspired by the purchase of a diamond engagement ring, Harold excitedly shared the news with Pete, who harbored suspicions about Lucy's fidelity due to her frequent rendezvous with Grimmy. Blinded by love, Harold proposed to Lucy, and she accepted his proposal, leading to their marriage in the midst of 2003. Acquiring a $1 million home in Warshire County, their new family life in the neighborhood overflowed with joy. Welcoming Jameson into the family with open arms, Harold treated him as his own, fostering a strong familial bond. Soon after their wedding, their daughter, Hearth, was born, becoming the apple of their eyes. Surrounded by supportive neighbors like Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, Lucy and Harold's familial ties deepened with each passing day. However, as time went on, issues began to arise in their relationship. Harold grew increasingly demanding, expecting Lucy's unwavering obedience. Lucy, who had always been an independent woman, was not prepared to acquiesce to Harold's every demand. Arguments and disagreements became more frequent, casting a shadow over their family life. Their son, Jameson, bore witness to this tense atmosphere, and it negatively impacted his childhood. Even their neighbors began to take note of Lucy and Harold's escalating reliance on alcohol, exacerbating their familial problems. However, when the arguments and shouting ceased, neighbors interpreted it as a sign that the family was attempting to reconcile. In 2009, Lucy found solace in virtual conversations with her old school friend, Garrett, via social media. Sensing his wife's emotional distance, Harold made the difficult decision to leave for Mexico, allowing Lucy space. In his absence, Lucy invited Garrett to visit, blindsiding Harold upon his return. Lucy swiftly filed for divorce, prompting Harold to begin an affair with their neighbor, Rachel Walbon. The divorce proceedings were marred by disputes over property division. Lucy, adamant about keeping the house for the sake of their children, opposed Harold's insistence on selling it. Their disagreements intensified as Lucy revealed unsettling truths about Harold's past, further fueling the acrimony. Amidst the emotional turmoil, Lucy accepted Garrett's invitation to spend time with him in Wales, making no effort to conceal her phone conversations from Harold upon her return. Despite her efforts to salvage their relationship, the constant arguments persisted, and the tension between them became unbearable for Jameson and their daughter, Hearth. On the evening of February 1st, 2010, as the day drew to a close, Harold, intoxicated from several glasses of wine, was taken aback by the delivery of a package addressed to their neighbor, Stephen Kennedy. It was closer to 9 p.m. when Harold returned from work. Stephen noticed a notification that his parcel had been delivered to Harold. Seeing Harold at home, he approached him to retrieve his package. Harold greeted him warmly and offered him a drink. Stephen, not refusing a glass of wine, agreed, and Harold poured him one. As Stephen entered and greeted Lucy, he observed Harold was already inebriated. After a single glass of wine, Stephen took his parcel and left. Shortly after, a heated argument erupted between the couple regarding furniture for their new house. Jameson, hearing the commotion, rushed into the kitchen to witness Harold striking his mother with a kitchen utensil. Reacting promptly, he dialed the police and comforted his sister Lucy, who was then fleeing the house with the children. Lucy sought refuge at Stephen's house, hoping for assistance. However, en route, Harold caught up with her and viciously attacked her with a knife, stabbing her in the chest. Callously, he dragged her body under a bush and disappeared. Hearing Lucy's screams, Stephen rushed outside and discovered her body. Initially thinking she had fainted, he quickly realized the severity of the situation. Officer Steve C. Fox, arriving at the scene, promptly called for an ambulance and commenced a search for Harold. Despite efforts, Harold evaded capture, leaving behind terrified children who sought shelter until the police arrived. This tragic incident marked the onset of their family's downfall and the start of a grueling journey towards justice. An ambulance promptly arrived and transported Lucy to Yorkshire Hospital, but it was too late. Lucy succumbed to her injuries upon arrival. Meanwhile, consumed by fear and remorse, Harold sought solace at the doorstep of his friend Rachel. With trembling voice, he confessed to committing a heinous act, but withheld the details. In an attempt to atone, he transferred a substantial sum of $40,000 to Rachel, relinquished all his assets, including cash, car keys, and paychecks. After Harold headed home, the police began their search for him. They scoured the streets, interviewed witnesses, but Harold seemed to vanish into thin air. Finally, fortune smiled upon the detectives when Harold was arrested on his way from Rachel's house. His face, distorted by fear and remorse, spoke volumes. Lucy's family, Roger and Andrea, were overwhelmed with grief. In an official press release, they expressed immense sorrow for the loss of their daughter and declined to comment further. The forensic medical examination confirmed Lucy died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. Evidence found at the crime scene and the testimony of Jameson, Lucy's son, who witnessed the tragedy, became pivotal in solving the case. The tale of Harold and Lucy is a love story turned nightmare. Although the trial concluded, the echo of the tragedy will resonate for years to come. Harold Landry, found guilty of Lucy's death, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years before parole eligibility. He would be 82 years old upon release, but no sentence could bring Lucy back. Roger and Andrea found solace in the fair verdict, though their hearts remained heavy with grief. Harold Landry maintained his innocence, vowing to appeal the verdict, claiming he wouldn't change anything even knowing the future. The Landry family remained resilient, promising to preserve Lucy's memory by embodying her best qualities for their grandchildren. Despite the irreparable loss, Lucy would forever remain a symbol of light and love in their hearts. Looking ahead, the Landry family embraced hope. Harold received the punishment he deserved, while Lucy's legacy continued to inspire her loved ones. With Lucy's love and light in their hearts, the Landry family found the strength to move forward, carrying her memory with them into the future. The case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and grew up with 3 loving sisters. His parents provided him with an adventurous upbringing, allowing him to attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. Ryan's good looks, charming features, and charismatic personality made him a standout among his peers. After completing high school, he attended Indiana University, where he excelled in his studies, graduating with honors in 2005 with a triple major in political science, history, and geography. Following in his family's footsteps, Ryan pursued a career in law and enrolled in Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. His ultimate goal was to run a successful law firm, providing fair and competent legal representation to those who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin, Carissa, for support. During this time, he regularly visited her in Lexington, Kentucky, where he met Shauna Hubers, a native of the city. Shauna was a charming and lively individual with a warm personality that drew people to her. Despite their 8-year age difference, their mutual attraction grew stronger with each visit Ryan made to Lexington. As they spent more time together, their connection deepened. Shauna began to spend more weekends in Highland Heights, where Ryan lived, taking care of him and cooking for him. However, their promising future came to a devastating end on October 12, 2012. In a distressing 911 call, Shauna revealed that she had just killed her boyfriend Ryan. She described a harrowing scene of domestic violence that had escalated out of control, claiming that Ryan had attempted to physically abuse her and confronted her with a gun. According to Shauna, she panicked and pulled the trigger, shooting Ryan, and then shot him several more times, believing she was putting him out of his misery. Within minutes of Shauna's call, officers arrived at the scene, responding to the shocking tragedy. When police officers arrived, they told Shauna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually complied. As she walked out, the officers told her to lie down on the ground. Shauna was clearly upset as she followed their instructions. After handcuffing her and putting her in the patrol car, the officers went into the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. The crime scene investigators found that the apartment was slightly messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. The investigators learned that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned guns, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic that Shayna used to shoot him. From the evidence, they determined that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna shot him. They knew this because of the blood on the table. However, the fact that many items on the table were undisturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The investigators searched the apartment thoroughly, while other officers canvassed the neighborhood, looking for additional information. One neighbor, Nikki, provided valuable information to the detective. Nikki knew Shayna well and believed that Ryan didn't return Shayna's dedication to him. According to Nikki, they frequently argued, often disturbing the peace. Months earlier, Nikki recalled an incident where Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid if Shayna claimed that Ryan had picked her up and thrown her down the hallway, injuring her. Nikki encouraged Shayna to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna chose not to. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about shooting Ryan. Before questioning her, they read her Miranda rights, informing her of her right to an attorney. Shayna exercised this right and requested an attorney. However, she chose to talk to the detectives despite this. When asked about the victim, Shayna replied, "The man I killed," which showed a sense of detachment. She claimed she acted in self-defense, saying Ryan had grabbed her by the throat and thrown her around the apartment. Shayna described the night as surreal and out of body. Later in the interview, she added that Ryan had said mean things to her, taunting her while holding a gun, and that he was under the influence of drugs. Shayna maintained that she shot Ryan because she believed he was going to kick her out of his condo. She said she picked up the gun and shot him once, and then shot him several more times after seeing him twitch. During her confession, Shayna revealed that Ryan was vain and wanted a nose job, so she shot him in the face to grant his wish. During the intense questioning, Shayna revealed her worries about her schoolwork and how having a dead boyfriend would affect her future relationships. She was specifically concerned that no one would want to marry her once they found out she had killed her boyfriend in self-defense. The detective listened to her statement but ultimately arrested her and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna appeared genuinely surprised by her arrest, claiming she had acted in self-defense when she shot him. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, filling the courtroom with anticipation. The prosecutor started by comparing Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been accused of murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander. The similarities between the two cases added to the tension in the courtroom as everyone waited for the verdict. The prosecutor believed that Shayna was obsessed with her ex-boyfriend Ryan, and that he was all she could think about. Ryan's friends testified that he wanted to end their relationship and was avoiding Shayna's calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna would often show up uninvited at Ryan's condo in Highland Heights. On the night Ryan was murdered, the prosecution presented evidence that he had a date planned with Audrey Bolt, a former beauty queen. The prosecution suggested that Shayna was motivated by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that Ryan stood her up on the night of the murder. She had no idea he had been shot and killed until later. The prosecution presented evidence that Ryan had told his father he wanted to break up with Shayna, and his father advised him to be kind to her to avoid a messy breakup. However, Ryan and Shayna exchanged texts on the day of the murder, with Ryan telling her he didn't want to see her. Despite this, Shayna showed up at his condo uninvited. The prosecution believed that during an argument, Ryan told Shayna he was done with her and that she could no longer control him. This allegedly enraged Shayna, who then picked up a gun and shot Ryan. The prosecution played a video of Shayna's police interrogation, which they claimed showed her to be a cold-blooded murderer. In the video, Shayna appears carefree and unemotional, which the prosecution argued was inconsistent with someone who had just killed in self-defense. However, this interpretation was open to interpretation by the jury. The defense argued that Ryan was acting erratically and violently on the night of the murder due to drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medication and amphetamines. The autopsy results showed that these drugs were present in Ryan's system. The defense claimed that Shauna shot Ryan in self-defense. The evidence suggested that the substances he was using influenced his actions. To support this idea, Shauna's lawyers called an expert in toxicology to testify on her behalf. The expert stated that a combination of anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. The defense presented this expert testimony to create a reasonable explanation for Shauna's actions, questioning whether she had intentionally meant to harm anyone. During Shauna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution became worried that the jury might be swayed by Shauna's self-defense claim, particularly because she was smart, young, and attractive. These fears were alleviated on April 23rd when the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shauna of murdering her boyfriend Ryan Poston. However, at the sentencing hearing in August 2015, Shauna continued to blame Ryan for his own death, which outraged his friends and family. Shauna claimed she was innocent throughout the trial and refused to take responsibility for her actions, despite the evidence against her. In Kentucky, defendants who are victims of domestic violence may be eligible for reduced parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge didn't believe Shauna qualified for this reduced parole, citing that her crime was a premeditated murder. As a result, Shauna was sentenced to 40 years in prison, making her eligible for parole in 17 years, at the age of 41 in 2032. After her sentencing, Shauna appealed for a new trial, which was granted in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had a felony conviction, which they had concealed. This violated Kentucky law, as felons are not allowed to serve on juries. In August 2018, Shauna's second trial for Ryan Poston's murder began, 4 months later than expected. Her defense attorney presented opening arguments, stating that during her year-and-a-half relationship with Ryan, Shauna tried her best to make him happy. However, their relationship suffered as a result. The defense attorney claimed that on the night Shauna met Ryan, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting impact on Shauna, causing her to take several weeks to respond to his messages afterwards. Additionally, the defense team argued that Shauna had a history of trauma stemming from a sexual assault she experienced in high school. This led to her struggles with alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They claimed that this traumatic experience contributed to her behavior on the night of Ryan's murder. The defense team's strategy was to present a sympathetic portrayal of Shauna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They aimed to challenge the prosecution's narrative and convince the jury that her behavior was driven by a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. Shauna's defense team claimed that she was a victim of domestic violence by Ryan rather than a cold-blooded killer. They argued that her actions were a result of years of abuse not driven by revenge or financial gain. The defense pointed out that Ryan constantly belittled Shauna about her weight and breast size, making her feel insecure and inadequate. This, they said, contributed to her low self-esteem. The defense also stated that Shauna and Ryan's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent arguments and frustration on both sides. They claimed that Ryan's desire for a more intimate connection was unfulfilled, leading to a growing rift between they. The defense presented evidence that Shauna had received a treatment to improve her romantic life. They claimed that she got this treatment to address sexual problems in their relationship and strengthen their bond. The defense argued that Ryan's consistent lack of interest and rejection made things worse, causing Shauna to become more and more frustrated and disconnected from him. The defense claimed that Ryan often broke up with Shauna, only to pursue relationships with other women. However, the prosecution clarified that they were not trying to portray Ryan as a perfect partner, but rather as someone who was not abusive. The prosecution argued that Shauna did not kill Ryan in self-defense, but rather because he had finally ended their toxic relationship on the night of the shooting. They believed Ryan had every reason to break up with Shauna, as she continued to harass him even after their previous breakups. Despite Ryan's efforts to end the relationship, Shauna consistently returned. The prosecution saw this as evidence of Shauna's inability to let go of the relationship. A friend of Ryan's testified that this breakup was different, as Ryan had never had the courage to end things with Shauna in person before, implying that this time the breakup would be permanent. Ryan accused Shauna of trying to hold on to him. To support this claim, the prosecution presented texts where Shauna told her friends that the romantic interactions with Ryan had brought them closer. However, Shauna testified in her own defense, contradicting Ryan's claim. She said that their romantic interactions had actually driven them apart. In a separate text exchange, Shauna asked Ryan for sex, but he declined due to the side effects of his antidepressant medication, which had reduced his libido. Despite these conflicting accounts, Shauna testified that Ryan had forcibly had sex with her. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury again found Shauna guilty of murdering Ryan, despite the contradictory testimonies and evidence. The jury confirmed their original verdict, and during the sentencing hearing, Shauna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's remarkable singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she asked the jury to consider granting Shauna parole, emphasizing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact others' lives. Shauna's mother made it clear that her plea did not diminish the profound grief and pain experienced by the family of Ryan Poston. Despite her mother's emotional appeal, Shauna was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. According to the sentence, Shauna must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.